Welcome. I'm so glad you've joined us again for another episode of Leading Leaders Podcast, and welcome to the 2020 Servant Leader Series. As you know, our focus here is dealing with people who are leaders in their community, leaders in their industry, and leaders in general, people who are impacting and influencing others' lives. In that capacity, we find people in all walks of life, from pastors to football players to high school coaches to political leaders who are impacting and influencing other people. Today, we have a chance to sit down with a true influence in the community, not just in the workplace, not just in her local community, but also in the lives of families, literally thousands of families that she's served in her years in practice in the most critical times. That moment that nobody wants to plan for, but everybody should, that everybody is going to eventually encounter, and nobody wants to. And that is that moment when you have left this earth. And the question is, who gets your stuff when you're gone? In fact, she's the author of the book, Who Gets Your Stuff? And so I want you to meet and help me welcome Leigh Hilton. Thank you for being with me today.
Yeah, thank you.
So we met, if I'm not mistaken, about 5 years ago. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's
about 5 years ago. And so I think in our crossing of paths, that had a lot to do with just networking and small business and promoting yourself through communication, which is my area of focus, leadership and communication skills. But your area of focus is really helping people plan for what comes next when you don't have any days left. How did you get into this line of work?
So my undergraduate degree was in accounting, and when I went through law school, I realized I liked estate planning, which deals with numbers. But what I like the most about what I do is actually getting to help families figure out what they need to protect themselves and protect their families. And so it was an added bonus to it. But I initially got into it because I enjoyed the number aspect of it.
You know, it's fascinating to me. You use the word protect, and in the last couple of days as we've been doing the interviews and the training videos, some of the things that I've heard you say are protect against creditors, protect against predators. And I'm not sure that the average family would think protection is what they need. I think a lot of people look at the idea of end of life and they think medical care, burial expenses, et cetera, et cetera. And it's easy for us, especially when we lose a loved one, to think, doesn't the whole world grieve with me? Or why doesn't everyone else hurt with me? And the idea of protection is the farthest thing from our mind, because we're not thinking of someone seeing us as vulnerable. We see others seeing us in need. So help me understand and help those that are viewing understand what it means to protect against in that time.
Right. So a good portion of what we talk about is whatever assets that you leave behind. So whatever you've worked all your life to accumulate, people want to make sure that when they give it to somebody else, so their kids, grandkids, nieces and nephews, that other people don't try to take it away from them. So if they ever got sued, and one of the easiest ways to settle a lawsuit is to show there's nothing that they can get to. So if we put a protective wrapper around it, we can make it where it's not vulnerable to people doing that. And the sad thing is, like you said, during the period of time you're grieving, you're kind of assuming people aren't going to try to take advantage of you. But unfortunately, there are some bad people in the world that might try to take advantage of people along the way.
And they kind of looked at it like an opportunity.
Right.
You know, it seems bizarre, but just yesterday I went grocery shopping and I had 2 baskets. So as I'm putting one in the vehicle, I realized the other one was kind of leaning against the front bumper. And I saw a lot of people passing through the parking lot. And the flash that went through my mind was the video on social media of the 2 women fighting over a package of toilet paper. And I thought, you know, if some young buck decided he wanted all those groceries that had already been paid for and took off with that basket, I'm about as exposed and vulnerable as you can get. I've got all my equipment in the van. The door is wide open. It's all unlocked. I got 1 basket of groceries here. If he takes off with that one, he's got half my stuff, and there's nothing I can do about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that moment when you've lost a loved one, or there's been a storm or a tragedy or a crisis like that, no one's really thinking, how do I protect everything? Mm-hmm. Because they're really thinking, you know, I'm very focused on what I have to get done right now.
Right. And the other type of protection we talk to people about that makes sense in the right now kind of conversation is in the event you were unable to take care of yourself, so you start losing your capacity, ability to make good decisions, who do you trust to manage your money to make sure you have the things you need? So to make sure they pay your bills, put you in a nice, safe place to live, make sure you're taken care of, that's a vulnerability to think through that you would need protection for. So in this period of time that we're being a little more worried about how things might pan out, I think we're less concerned about if we die, how our stuff is taken care of, than we are about what if we're alive but need help.
I was just talking to Hunter earlier about one of the clients that I'm working with in another capacity, and his business in this season, the coronavirus pandemic, global pandemic, his business model stood to make hundreds of millions of dollars, literally pushing on the bottom floor of billions of dollars. And the Friday before the national emergency was announced, he was in the hospital for open heart surgery. And so all of the stuff we were working on to take his business to the next level wasn't quite ready yet for him to step aside and everything to still run without him. And it's a frightening thing to think that, you know, whatever legacy, whatever inheritance, whatever opportunity, you just missed just by hours, $1 billion opportunity, because there was nothing written in structure in place for somebody to go, all right, he's down for a minute, somebody else, who's our backup quarterback? You don't have one. So in some of the stuff that you do, a lot of people think planning. It was fascinating to talk to the contrast between Cassidy and Hunter. Cassidy very specifically focused on dealing with kids with special needs in the family and preparing for that care in the event that they're not there. But Hunter very focused on how do we make sure that your business structure, from the first minute you have an idea until you leave this planet, is ready for somebody else to take the realm, for somebody else to make sure that you're protected if there's a fallout in the business, or if you just decide to part ways, or there's a divorce, or there's a death in the family. And so how is it that you, as an individual, because this organization has a lot of different spokes, how is it that you came to the place where your heart said, I want a group of people like this, I want to do these things?
I really look for, in the people that we add on, is people that really care about other people. So they're trying to figure out how people can be protected, how to take care of those different pieces of the puzzle. And like I said from the beginning, I like numbers, I like puzzles, I like things that we can figure out. And part of the reason why we've added the areas that we have is that we've seen a need. So when I started having families come in that had children with special needs, I realized that they needed a different type of estate planning than somebody who didn't have a child with special needs. And so to make sure that we have the right people in place and enough knowledge to make sure they're protected. And then with business owners, a lot of times business owners, they're all about growing and running the business, and to think through what if something happened to them is a really hard thing for them to do. And so we added Hunter on to be able to make sure that those businesses are protected in those kind of situations.
And then you have Caitlin, who really focuses on that wills and probate. And again, her story lines up with that. I'm 18 years old and went through this process when my dad was gone. And so it's really fascinating to see that you put people in there. I think I mentioned this with Caitlin. One of the curriculums that I teach for communicators and for leaders is called Learn to Roar. And it means to be relevant, have ownership, speak with authority, and be responsible for how people feel when you're done. And I think there are a lot of leaders who, like you said, they're focused on the growth of their business. They're focused on the next marketing. They're focused on the next widget they have to create or the next service they have to provide. And how do we branch out? Where do we find them more markets? Where do we advertise more? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're less concerned about what happens if I'm not here anymore. You know, if you look at somebody like a Steve Jobs or a Gary Vaynerchuk, they built businesses with hundreds, if not thousands, or hundreds of thousands of employees. And if they pass tomorrow, who's ready? Who's ready to run it? And is it legally set up in such a way that someone can? Or does it just fall apart and all these people are left? Because that's really the risk that you run. Now, I had a chance to visit also with Tammy, who's kind of your front of house representative. And from what I understand, she's been around over a decade, involved in your business. And so she had some really good insights, not just to how Leigh Hilton PLLC serves customers and communities, but how you serve your employees, how you serve the families that come in the door, and the kind of relationship that you have with them as a very not type A domineering kind of a command and control leader, but a very stalwart, steady, consistent leader. Is that the way you would have described yourself before I said that?
No, I don't know that I would have. That is kind of interesting to think through. One of the things I focus on with both our team members and with the clients that we serve is I like people to enjoy working with us and to have the type of experience, like you said, how I feel responsible for how they feel. So when you leave my office, you should feel like you've got a new friend, like somebody you want to have be almost part of your family. and that kind of relationship. And so that's what I look for both in team members and with working with clients.
It's really fascinating too, because when I talked to Tammy, I asked her the question. My mom was widowed when she was in her late 30s, early 40s as well. She worked as a janitor in our middle school, went back to college and got her degree the same month as her 50th birthday. But she's got this don't mess with mama kind of mode that most of the time people don't see. They just, everybody in town calls her mom. She's seen more of these kids graduate from the Challenger High School and go on to college than you could possibly imagine. And so people show up at the house and they're like, hey, Mom, and I'm like, who are you? Why are you in my house? And why are you calling my mother Mom? But over time, you just realize that's just who she is. Mm-hmm. And Tammy's kind of got that thing too, but there's also that mama bear mode where you're like, you know what, don't cross the line. Mm-hmm. You can push me a long way, but there's going to be a place that it's just not a good idea to push anymore. Mm-hmm. That type of personality needs a certain type of leader. Mm-hmm. Did you realize that's who you were when you started this?
I actually didn't anticipate being in charge of anything when I graduated from law school. So really? I really thought that, in fact, in law school, they had us take courses on how you're going to run your own business. Okay. And the whole time I'm taking those courses, I'm like, well, I'm never going to own my own business. I don't actually need to know this information.
So CEO was not in your...
CEO was not in there. My personality type, I stand up and I become a leader if the people around me aren't leading well. Okay. And so pretty much what happened is I ended up going into a partnership with another attorney and realized that there was a vacuum of leadership. So when there's a vacuum of leadership, I step up and lead. And so that's how I started leading, started wanting to own my own firm, run my own firm. One of the things about me is I love marketing. I love reaching out to people. I love doing the seminars. And anybody I've ever worked for has never really fully understood the potential of that. Right. And so that's what really drove me to be on my own, is that I just enjoy that piece of the business and that piece of running the business, and I'm able to do that on my own. I'm not able to do that if I work somewhere else.
Well, and you have an opportunity to clone yourself, if you will. Mm-hmm. I find that in every environment where I'm coaching on leadership, there's a tension usually between the top brass, for lack of a better term, and the people that get the work done. Mm-hmm. And that tension is usually the top brass is like, there's something wrong with it, make them function better. And when I come in and I work with the top brass, we understand each other pretty well. And then I start working with the staff, and the staff's like, are you going to fire me? Or is that what you're here for? And you feel like a hatchet man, just trying to get a feel or a lay of the land. And I didn't get any sense of that talking with anybody on your team. And not that that's what I'm here for, but usually the read on people in the conversation is like, I'm a little nervous about what, and everybody that I've talked to is like, I've got a vision, I've got a purpose, I know what I'm doing here. I think the best way Hunter put it was, Hunter said, I've worked in places where we had almost a cantankerous relationship. I'm trying to get your money, I'm after this is my only goal, and you charge them for paper clips and phone calls. And here we work together, everything's flowing in the same direction, so there's synergy and not that destructive energy of I'm trying to get one over on you. Mm-hmm. There's not a win unless we win together. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty powerful, but I've also found that in everywhere that I've worked with leaders, that's a culture. Mm-hmm. And it starts at the top level. It's either corruption, or it's driven for money, or it's driven for results, success, numbers, bottom lines, or it's driven for the value of people who walk in and out the door. Mm-hmm. And that's what I see here. Yeah,
and it really is people driven. And I tell people I help a lot of people, and I happen to make money. And I never put making money ahead of helping people. So it's where your focus are. So if our focus is on how much money we can make, there's a certain feel to how you behave, how you treat other people. We help people, and they do pay us to help them, but the focus is on helping them. And so we always look at what does the person actually need. Right. And based on what they actually need, then we talk to them about services we can provide that are within that. But it's never focused on how much money we can make out of the transaction. And it has to be a win-win. It has to be the people walking away feel like they got value from what they got from us also. And I think that then bleeds into the culture. So the other people, the people on my team, when they're looking at how they're treating each other and how I'm treating them, we're not money focused. And it just makes a difference in how you view the world.
Well, and I think Tammy said it really well. She said, I've been here long enough, I've watched the process long enough, I've reviewed the paperwork often enough that I have a pretty good feel for what they can do, what they will do, and what they recommend, pretty much across the board. Kind of seen it all, so to speak, at this point. And she said, a lot of times I'll sit down in the initial assessment with someone and say, I understand what you're asking for, it's not really what you need. And we would love to make money, but we will not make money providing you a service you don't need or that's not going to do you any good. And she said, from time to time they'll push, and so I'll take it to the attorney or schedule a meeting with them, and 9 times out of 10 the attorney will come back and go, that's not the best tool for you, that's not what you need. Let me either A, recommend you to somebody else, or B, just tell you, here's what I would recommend instead, even if that costs us money or means we make none. And again, that's a culture thing. That comes from the top all the way down.
It does.
And for everybody to have said that in your organization, that we're people focused, we want synergy, we want everything moving in the same direction. We intend to make money, but that's not our goal. It's just the process of getting things done. And we work on flat fees. Explain that a little bit.
So I went to fixed prices, I'm trying to think, probably 7-8 years ago. And the reason why I made the shift is I went to a conference and they started talking about how do you feel about people who bill you hourly. And I started thinking about it. My computer guy, when he comes in, he's working on my computer. And while he's sitting there, he answers a phone call from another client. My initial thought is, am I paying for that time?
Right.
Because he's currently not working on my computer. I also don't know until he leaves how much money it's going to cost me. And I just thought
ambiguous.
Yeah, it's very ambiguous, and you're signing up for pretty much a blank check. You're also encouraging them to work as slow as possible.
Right.
Because the slower you work, the more money you make.
Every time I'm driving in traffic and I pass that car in the middle of the road that's doing 35 and a 55, and I look in there and there are a bunch of guys that look like they're probably hourly labor, I'm thinking these guys are still on the clock. Right,
right. But it's like, and so if we do things at fixed prices, walking in what it's going to cost. You don't have the anxiety that we're going to charge you twice what you thought you were going to pay. And we also, if I have a conversation with you, and that's one of the things I love to do with people, is I like to actually hear about their families, hear about what travel they've done. I like to talk to them about my family, the trips we've taken, things like that. If I'm doing that and I'm billing you hourly, you're going to be thinking, wait a minute, she's on the clock and every minute she's talking I'm paying for. She's just making conversation to make more money. I'm actually making conversation because I want to know about your family.
Right.
And so it makes it where it doesn't have the adversarial side to the relationship. The other thing that made me switch is I had a lady call me one time and she said, I worried about this question I'm getting ready to ask you all weekend. So I lost sleep over the weekend, was worried about it, and I kept going back and forth in my mind whether it was worth $75 for me to have the answer. Wow. And she said, because I know you bill hourly, and it's probably going to cost me at least $75 to get the answer, and I didn't think it was a $75 question. And her question was so easy, and it literally took me a minute to answer it. And so we include that in our price too. So if you want to call us and ask a question, you want to email, I don't want you worrying about how much money I'm going to send you a bill for. It's just included in the process. And I think that gives a lot of people peace of mind that they're going to be taken care of.
Okay, so I want to give it a little bit of pushback on that, because I know there are people watching, especially those that are fans of Leading Leaders podcast, they're entrepreneurs, they're coaches, they're individuals like myself, who, if it's not a big contract, it's an hourly thing. And so it's, I'm going to come in and do a training for X amount of time. And then you have those clients that you've served them in several ways. They're like, can you just do this for me? And you realize that the answer you're about to give may not, in their opinion, be a $75 question, but what it costs you in time, in research, in educational investment. I watch probably 20 to 25 hours of training videos on psychology, on coaching, on leadership, on communication skills every week. Most people can't afford that much time to go to school, but it's why when my clients call me and ask a question, I generally have an answer that's going to save them a lot of time and money. And sure, you can do what I do and go through the trial and error and spend the time that I've done screwing it up to screw it up yourself and spend the time and the money trying to figure out how to fix it. Or you can call me and I go, no, you're just pushing the wrong button, try that one. And so is it the guy with the tool that walked into the machine shop and said, can I borrow your hammer? Hit the side of the machine and it cranks up, and they're like, great, thank you. And he's like, yeah, it'll be $1,000. I'm like, wait, you used our hammer? He's like, yeah. You were here 5 minutes. Yeah. But it took me 10 years to figure out how and where to hit it to get it to go again. That's worth the time.
Right.
So how do you balance that when you bring your team on board and say, listen, we're flat fee.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care if it takes you 2 hours to put this will together or 20 hours to put this will together. The cost of doing a will is X. That's what it's going to be. So you're best served to be productive, to be professional, to be efficient, to get this done in a reasonable amount of time. And dragging a fee is not going to make it any better. How do you juxtapose those things when you're hiring professionals like that?
Right. I think a lot of times anything you do the first time, it's going to take you dramatically longer than it does 10 years later.
Agreed.
And so a lot of the fixed prices that we have are kind of an average of that. So it's looking at, sometimes it's going to take, and sometimes we're guessing. If you're an easy to work with client, then it's going to take us less time than we guessed. If you are
fee, right?
if you're a person, if you're a person who just worries a lot and wants to ask a whole lot of questions,
right,
it's also going to take us more time. And we still will give you that time. And so it's kind of, when we're coming up with the fixed price, we've got to somewhat average how long do we think we're going to take with the client who's relatively low maintenance and the higher maintenance, because every once in a while I say, I wish you had a tattoo on your forehead that could tell me one way or the other. When you walk through the door, you're high maintenance, or when you walk through the door, you're not. Yeah. Because then we could probably price better accordingly to that. But we're somewhat guessing as far as an average, as far as how much time we think.
How often do you run into those customers that are like when Harry met Sally when she said, so which one am I? He said, you're the worst. You're high maintenance, and you think you're low maintenance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I run into a lot of those customers.
Oh yeah. We have a lot of people call the office and tell us that they want a simple will. And simple will actually means to them, I want it to not cost very much. And a lot of times,
interesting translation.
And a lot of times when people say that, they actually then, when you get the information about their family, they're in a second marriage and they have a child with special needs and they want a trust for their animals and they've got all these complicated.
And they started their own business, which is a sole proprietorship from 22 years ago.
Right. And they've got property in 5 states and there's all this complication, but they still want a simple will. Well, the simple will isn't going to take care of what they want taken care of. Right. So it's also a communication thing. So I guess that's similar to the when Harry met Sally. They think they're low maintenance, but they're really high maintenance.
Or their low maintenance budget. What is it? The tuna fish budget on a caviar taste.
Right. And all the different.
And I have them all the time. They'll call me and they're like, just a quick question about a video, and I'm like, okay. And then I answer the question, and they're like, but what if I do this? And I'm like, well, so what you're saying is you have 12 questions. You just don't know which one to ask first.
Right.
That's different than asking one question and getting one answer. And I'm not trying to sell you by the question, but sometimes you ask the question not realizing everything that goes behind that. So an example, you said they got property in multiple states. Is a will or a trust, is that universal across the United States? What if they're in another country? What if they have properties in another country?
So trusts in particular are designed to move state to state. So if you have a trust and you move to another state or have property in another state, they can still govern that kind of property. Wills are very, very state specific. So any state you move into, you need to have a will in that state. So for instance,
if you write a will in Texas and move to Oklahoma, you better do your will again.
You better redo it.
Does that mean that it usurps the first one, that it replaces it?
Correct.
Wow.
It does, yeah. Because in Texas, there's 2 types of probates. There's an independent administration, which takes 2 or 3 months, costs $4,000 to $6,000. There's a dependent administration, which can take a year and cost $15,000 to $20,000. If you have an out-of-state will and you move here and you have the wrong language, you're signing up for that dependent and expensive. So definitely state specific. But if somebody thinks they're going to move around or owns property in more than one state, a trust makes perfect sense as far as how to put things together. Other danger with out-of-state property is you have to probate a will here in Texas and in the other state, which can make it very expensive.
Okay, so when you think about that worst case scenario for someone who thinks, I got this figured out, because I run into these all the time. Mm-hmm. They'll say to me, oh yeah, leadership, yeah, we got that. I mean, I've been running my own company for 8 years. I go to the Chamber of Commerce thing every week, and they take us around to the courthouse and the Sheriff's Department. Yeah, we got leadership nailed. And then you listen to them in an outrageous phone call with their employee, and you're like, maybe you got the leadership thing nailed, but you don't have the human relationship thing nailed. And sorry, but that's a big part of leadership. Mm-hmm. How often do you run into those people? They've got their will on the back of a napkin. They don't understand, that. And I've heard you tell stories over the last 5 years of the second wife or the step grandparents, or and I've even seen it in my own family, the remarriages in the late ages and all of the dynamics that can happen in that. So part of the challenge that we both face in providing the service that I provide in leadership and communication coaching, and what you provide in handling your business affairs and your end of life affairs, in both of those cases, there's a lack of awareness that sadly is not just a lack of true awareness, it's a deceptive understanding, a presumption that they are aware. Mm-hmm. How do you approach that? And I know you do seminars as part of that to raise that awareness, inviting people who should know these answers but maybe don't. How else do you do that?
Well, one of the things is most meetings that we have with clients, they'll actually say things like, I hadn't thought about that. So the thing, like you said, the awareness of what the actual issues are is a hard thing for people to do. Seminars are a good way to educate, try to figure out. Other thing is 8 out of 10 wills that people do themselves fail. And we've actually, in the last year, probated 8 wills, all of which cost the families thousands of dollars more than it would have if they had hired an attorney to do it correctly.
If they'd done the will properly in the first place.
Right. And the hard thing is, like you said, it's what you don't know. So you go online, you read the disclaimer on the program you're using, and it says it's not legal advice, you should consult an attorney, but you ignore that part. But it does,
everything else they say is true, but that one line, that's wrong.
Yeah. And it's a fill in the blank thing. So you fill in the blanks and you assume that what it spits out makes sense. But if you don't read it from the way an attorney would read it or a court would read it if there's an argument, you're not going to know what's missing.
So basically it's Mad Libs.
It is. It is Mad Libs. I hadn't thought about that, but it probably is Mad Libs as far as how...
Mad Libs will.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of times it's just a matter of thinking through how it spits out. Yeah, I had one guy who was really mad at his kids, decided he wanted to leave everything to his brother. And he wrote up a will that says, I leave all my personal property and all my business property to my brother. And so what the court interpreted that as is personal property is things other than real estate. So he dies, and what he owns is a 100-acre farm. And part of why he was mad at his kids is his kids all said that when he died, they were going to sell it, and he didn't want it sold. So he decided he's going to give it to his brother instead. But his will, the way he wrote it, personal property is not real estate. That land was not owned by his business. So the court said that land actually goes to those kids. But the other bad part of the story is because the will didn't say what happened to the land, we had to do something called a determination of heirship, which is determine who his family was. So it ended up costing thousands and thousands of dollars to track down the fact that these were his only kids.
Do DNA tests, make sure there's nobody else out there.
Right. All that kind of stuff and all the kinds of searches related to it. So based on that, the kids he was mad at got the land, and it cost dramatically more than it should have because the language wasn't correct.
Wow.
So it's a you don't know what you don't know, because common people or anybody who isn't an attorney would probably look at that and say, I meant everything I owned in my business and everything I own personally. So to anybody other than a lawyer, that language probably would have been perfectly clear. He meant everything went to his brother. Right. But he didn't say everything. If he'd said everything, it would have worked probably. But it's a matter of like you said, you don't know what you don't know until it's too late.
There's a word that's flying around right now. What do they call him? Trying to remember the adverb in front of it, but xenophobic, hysterical xenophobic. And I mentioned that phrase to somebody the other day, and she's like, what is xenophobic? Well, she's got a master's degree. She's never heard the word xenophobic. Mm-hmm. And I said, it's basically a pedantic way of saying racist. And she said, what's pedantic? I'm like, we're going nowhere really fast. Uh-huh. He doesn't like other people. How far down do we have to bring this? But the reality is the average speaking person doesn't use words like that. Right. They're intended to talk over the heads of certain people. It's an intended way of communicating that kind of narrows the playing field. If I say to someone, bromoethyl chloride will actually explode at room temperature, most people go, whatever. And firefighters who've dealt with that stuff go, below room temperature. I mean, its ambient temperature is like 18. So if you let it out of the can, it's on fire. Wow. It's jet fuel for the U-2 aircraft. Mm-hmm. That's all it does. But that's a pretty powerful thing to know. But it's a limited realm of knowledge. Nobody else cares. Yeah. And so here's one of the things that I find fascinating. If I were to say, I met a group of people the other day 5 or 6 of them all in the same office. They just love on people. They love to help people protect. They love to help, defend families against, predators, et cetera, et cetera. And probably no one would say, oh, those were attorneys. Right? Because most people think ambulance chasers, fighting for the big lawsuits, et cetera. And I think, again, that was Hunter that said, I worked in so many places where it was cantankerous. There was no win-win. Mm-hmm. There was no let's move together in this direction. He said the amount of peace that it brought, just being in a place where everything we do is about them winning, as opposed to how do I get money out of you? How do I close the sale? How do I move to the next transaction? It changes everything in the way that you interact with people. Mm-hmm. So was that a revelation that you had, or was that a natural tendency you've had all along?
It's a natural tendency I've had all along. Because one of the things that I realized really early in my career is there's some attorneys that are one person at home and one person with type of person with family, and they're a different person at work. And I started thinking through it. I wanted that to be congruent. So okay. If you meet me in a social setting or with my family, you're going to see the exact same person you see at work. And in my family environment, I love on people, enjoy spending time with them. I want to have people around me that I enjoy being with. And I want the exact same thing at work.
And that's because you value humanity.
I value humanity and I value other people, and I also just want to get along with others. And so I want that kind of environment and how it's done. And I've watched other attorneys go to work and be jerks all day and then be nice to their family and friends. And I thought, I just want to be nice to people. I want to enjoy being around them. I want people to enjoy being around me, and I want that kind of environment. And so I think it's interesting because like I said, I didn't go into this intending to be a leader. I didn't intend to have a firm this size when I started in it. But one of the things that I've always done is I'm authentically me in all places, and it's actually very freeing.
It is.
Because you don't have to pay attention to which realm you're currently in.
Lynn, I think there are a lot of people from a leadership standpoint that struggle with that. You see leaders in different capacities, various types of businesses, and how they act to the customer versus their employee is different. Mm-hmm. How they act to one kind of customer, the amount of money they spend, versus another, totally different. Mm-hmm. How they treat their spouse in public versus at home, totally different. Mm-hmm. How they treat their children at home. And honestly, I grew up in an environment where yelling was a common thing, where a lot of tension, a lot of pressure, a lot of command and control. You'll do what I told you to because I told you to. It didn't even have to make sense. I remember my stepdad, a guy who was very abusive physically, used to say things to me like, go do something even if it's wrong. What kind of instruction is that? Basically, it's get out of my sight. I don't want to see your face all the time.
Right.
And so that lack of value for humanity, the first 10 years of my kids were growing up, I was a jerk. I was a jerk to my wife. I was a jerk but at work, top salesman. Because I could turn it on and turn it off, and I could be on the phone that sweet, smarmy, persuasive, mm-hmm. and all the skills of communication that were naturally in me, I used them really well to make money. But when I went home, all of the pressure that rested on me just spilled out. Mm-hmm. It's really hard, and I think the word that I used when I was talking to Tammy was that when you look at culture, 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.5 times out of 10, culture starts at the top leadership and then it flows down. It's like everything else. They say, mud rolls downhill, and so do most things. Mm-hmm. But I think culture does as well. And the word that just keeps coming up in everybody that I've talked to so far about Leigh Hilton PLLC is integrity. Mm-hmm. Your word was congruent. Mm-hmm. And I think when you think about how I'm going to serve the guy whose will might include a box of napkins and a fork, mm-hmm. versus the one who has 100 acres in 5 different states, the flat fee mm-hmm. is the same for both of them. The amount of time that they're going to get is the same for both of them, presuming the services are the same. Right. But the amount of time and attention and compassion and care and empathy that they're going to get from the people serving them will be no different, regardless of the need that they have, which is to protect their family and their assets for the future. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that was interesting, and I believe it was Cassidy who brought it up, she talked about providing that dependent care, especially when somebody's gone. And she said, if they're already receiving some kind of public assistance, mm-hmm. there's a cap in what they can inherit. And if you go over that threshold, even unintentionally, you can do more damage than can be undone.
Mm-hmm.
And so the illustration I think that we kind of used for me to make sense of it was, if you've got an old car and it's worth $3,000, most people wouldn't consider that an inheritance worth bothering over. But whether that car is donated to a church car program, or donated to Texas Can Academy, or donated to the kid who's special needs who can't drive it, makes the difference in whether or not they receive the benefits they've been receiving all along from public assistance, for an example. Is that right?
Close.
Okay.
They're allowed to have a car, so any car is exempt. But
regardless of the value.
Regardless of the value. But if they receive $5,000,
Or if they sold that car right away.
if they sold the car and it's cash, any cash over $2,000 could throw them off a benefit. So it's huge as far as the difference.
And see, that's one of those kind of things that a napkin-based will, or 2 or 3 pages of the internet, doesn't even ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
Are they on public assistance? What will be the total cash value of what you intend to leave behind?
Oh yeah, and then the other hard thing is once you've written in there, like, so if you said this grandchild who's already on public assistance gets $10,000, that grandchild can't say I disclaim it or I refuse to take it, and have it not count against them. It counts against them from the moment they inherit it.
Wow.
And so there's no fixing it once it's done, and that's part of what probably Cassidy talked to you about, was the fact that there's no going back.
Can't undo it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and even if they give it away, somebody now has to go back and start the process to redefine where they are after the money's gone.
Right. So once they get rid of the money, they're going to have to reapply. So it can make a huge difference as far as that. And yet, online wills aren't going to even know to ask the questions.
Wow.
Of that sort. So that's one of the other things. You're right. There's lots of gotchas that you wouldn't realize that way.
Well, and there's strange little stuff like intellectual property rights or mineral rights that are long lost and forgotten. I think it was you that mentioned the other day, in a specific scenario, there was a lady who asked about the land, and you said, make sure even if you separate the land, that the mineral rights stay in one.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought back to my granddad selling mineral rights at several different places all over East Texas. And at one point, they're not worth anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can have them. They're worth nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then oil shale.
Right.
Then natural gas. And now cobalt. People are like, who knew there was cobalt in East Texas?
Mm-hmm.
I was working with a client just recently who found that they have a very unusual and limited kind of coal. Not just coal, but a limited kind of coal in Arkansas. They're like, nobody has coal mines in Arkansas. Nobody mines for coal in Arkansas. He's like, I'm telling you. That's what they have there. And we bought it. And they're like, you're an idiot. You just bought a bridge in Arizona. What for? And then they did the research and sent some archaeologists. And they're like, he's right. Wow. It's not just coal. It's a very specific kind of coal. And it's priceless. Who would have known that?
Right.
So now the question is, how do you protect it? How do you hang on to something that has no value now but one day could?
Could. Well, actually, as you were talking, one of the things I kind of flashed back to is when I first started, anytime we sold real estate or had clients sell real estate, we didn't talk about minerals. And I'd actually have people come into me and say they've already drilled on my land, they couldn't find any oil or gas, and it's worthless. And that's before they started fracking.
Yes.
So it was a new technology, new way to get it. And so if I had a time machine, I could be extremely wealthy. I'm sure we could on a lot of levels. But if I could go back and say, no, keep your minerals, or I'll buy your minerals for nothing, you could make a lot of money off of it. The reason why I told that lady about making sure we kept the minerals intact is I have families where mom and dad split up the land, gave each of the kids a tract of it, made it as equal and fair as they possibly could, and one of the kids was lucky enough to be close to where they were pooling for oil or gas. Wow. And that kid became extremely wealthy. The other kids did not. And at that point, they don't feel like sharing.
Yeah, so one got millions and the other got dirt.
Right. So that's part of why I always tell people it makes and mineral rights, they don't mind them being fractions, so it doesn't hurt for it to be divided that way.
Well, I remember being involved in a negotiation not too long ago, and one of the guys in the deal said, I realize there are 5 or 6 of you on your team. What you need to do is just figure out how you're going to divide the dime. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, why would we fight over a dime? He goes, hang on, you misunderstand. A dime per barrel until it's done. And I was like,
I think I might fight over that dime.
That's a different question. How many dimes could that be, and when is it done? And that's the kind of, I never thought of that. Mm-hmm. What are the 20 questions that people would say, I hadn't thought of that. When I talked to Hunter, he'd say, there are a lot of scenarios that happen in business that when you bring it up, people are like, hadn't thought of that. And so one for an example for me, and this is a very kind of my own anecdote, but question at the same time, so don't bill me $75. But the intellectual property rights, they're a very hard to assess intangible value in perpetuity. In perpetuity, I think is the right word. Is that right? In perpetuity?
Yeah.
And so when you think about what is the value of intellectual property rights, well, the idea for the iPhone was useless. But the first patent is priceless. And the difference is a piece of paper. Because I know one of the guys who litigated the Samsung Apple lawsuit over intellectual property rights and patent technology on the touch glass.
Wow.
And he's a very wealthy man as a result of having litigated that. But that was a huge and expensive fight for both companies to figure out who really owns this. That kind of stuff, when I think about the content that I create, because like I said, I study 20 to 25 hours a week, but I produce another 10 to 20 hours every single week. I've created online courses and documentation and books. And right now, it doesn't generate a lot of revenue. But if I were to look back and say, I'm the great-grandchild of Hemingway, how do you put a dollar figure on that? I mean, what about the third generation, fourth generation, fifth generation of Jobs kids? That's a whole different ballgame. And so I look at it and go, okay, well, most artists, most poets, most famous literary people aren't famous till long after they're dead, which means their assets are zero while they're alive. Starving artists is a reason for that phrase. But one Van Gogh can change your financial history if you get your hands on it now. So how do you protect something that right now has no value, but one day could be worth millions?
I think it's similar. Oil and gas does a similar thing because, like I said, people will say it's not worth anything now, but you don't know what it's going to be in the future. But anything like that, property rights, copyright rights, any of that kind of thing, you need to make sure that we do put it in a way that can go generation to generation. Now you're going to have some idea you think it might become worth something in order to put it in a way. Now I have clients who actually say you can't sell it. So if, as with your examples, we can always have this in a trust. We can always have somebody in charge of it, and then whatever money it generates gets divided among everybody in the pool. The first generation that gets to decide to sell it all has to be grandkids, or you could put it some distance out so that they're not, because if you see the commercials for I want cash now.
Right.
So I want cash now. Somebody offers to buy these rights for $300 and they want $300. They may take that when they really, the better play is to keep it long term.
Right. And you mentioned some of that yesterday in the dealing specifically with the Secure Act, in how those assets are bundled. And I think we talked about the idea of seeds. You can eat your sunflower seeds, you can plant your sunflower seeds. And if you eat them, they're gone today and waste tomorrow. If you plant them, it may be 2, 3, 5, 6 months before you see anything, maybe years before there's enough sunflowers to harvest more seeds. But when there is, there will be way more of those than there will be of the seeds that you have right now. So it's like that $200,000 retirement. Yeah, you can cash out the $200,000 and buy a house, buy a boat, or you can leave it there, let it grow, even if it ups and downs several times in the course of pandemics and world tragedies, et cetera, et cetera. By the time your grandkids are ready to retire, it will be more than enough to share among you and them and everybody else.
And that's one of the things we talk a lot with our clients about is the fact that whatever you're leaving them, if you can encourage them to save it, and sometimes they do it in a matter of where they're going to get a certain amount per month for life.
Right.
And then that way the money does stretch out over time, or you can give them the ability to blow it. And one of the things I mentioned in a lot of my speeches, most inheritances are spent within 1 year, just like lottery winnings would. And so if you allow them to totally be up to themselves on whether they keep it or they sell it, they're probably going to sell it and going to spend it within a short period of time.
Well, I think that was Publishers Clearinghouse now makes that option, right? The lump sum payout of $1 million or $7,000 a week for life. And you're like, million versus 7,000, that's real easy math. And you're like, depends on how long you live, right?
It does, it does.
I mean, you're talking about $350,000 a year. 5 years from now, you've made more money. That's not hard math.
Right.
but it's hard for some people to get their mind around.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like the people who take their income tax check and they run to the car lot and buy an old used car and put used tires on it, and 3 months later they're like, oh, that didn't work very well. You're like, where'd all that money go you got from your tax return? And why did you get a tax return? Well, because I paid too much in. No, you didn't. You just gave them money to loan that you got a third of it back.
Yeah. I always think it's funny how people act like that's money that they didn't work to earn. Like they don't.
It's like lottery winning.
Yeah, they do think of it like lottery winnings as far as they do it. And they tend to blow it. If you look at what they do with it, because they think that it's lottery winnings, they blow it. If they realize they earned it, they worked really hard to earn it, then I think they would save it the way they do other money.
So I listen both to Dave Ramsey from a financial standpoint and Laurel Langmeyer. And I was at a seminar with Laurel. In fact, I did an interview with her. It's on the Leading Leaders podcast stuff as well. And I asked her about financial literacy and just basic understandings of math. Everybody talks about EQ and IQ, et cetera, et cetera. FQ is, financial quotient of intelligence is just off the charts, wacky and insane, because the core mindset is either lack or it's abundance. And never the two shall meet, neither shall their understandings, or so it seems. But she went through a whole series of teachings on being what they call it, a certified investor or an approved investor, something like that. She said you got to have a minimum of this many assets, you have this amount of money in the bank, you got to be qualified in this way, et cetera, before you can invest in these kind of things. Well, these kind of things have a 10-to-1 return. These kind of things require huge investment. They have risk, obviously, but the return is usually much higher than what you've invested, but you can only play there if you have a certain amount of money. And she said, here's what you need to understand. The system isn't broken. It was designed that way. It was designed to be like that lawyer speak, like that pedantic phraseology. It's intended that only certain people play at this level, only certain people get it, only certain people understand it, and everybody else is kind of left out on purpose. But those are the people that you tend to see with that lottery mentality. If I find $100 on the ground, do I run to the grocery store with my $100? Do I buy $100 worth of lottery tickets? Do I put it in the bank, or do I stick it in my wallet and wait for a time that I need $100 for emergency money? Like that blowout on the side of the road. Like, wow, I wish I had $100. Well, you had $100 2 weeks ago. What'd you buy with it? What'd you do with it? Where'd it go? And most people don't have the mentality to be accountable for that. So what do you do in the ways of financial literacy, understanding wealth, teaching people how to handle the money perhaps that they've inherited? Is that a service that your firm offers at this point?
One of the things that we talk through with our clients is similar to what you said. People who haven't had money, are they going to understand how to manage it?
Right.
So the fact that they've been scraping by, having a certain amount of money, and money drops in their lap, are they going to know how to get a financial advisor that knows what he's doing?
Right.
And is able to actually show them how to invest their money properly. And so a lot of my clients will actually require that their beneficiaries use the same financial advisor that they've been using. And part of that is to start getting that financial education along the way. Because until you get educated on it, until you're around people that know how to play at that level, they're just not going to know how to invest the money. So if you don't have a whole lot to save, then it makes sense to put it in the bank in CDs and savings accounts and those kind of things. But those don't even keep up with inflation.
Right.
So if you have a larger amount of money, it makes more sense to invest. Now, of course, the stock market's gone crazy really recently, and that.
So if you put $10,000 in January, it's probably $0 now.
Right. So that was a bad decision in the moment. Now, long term should be okay still, because the stock market is a roller coaster. Eventually, it goes up and down and up and down. So there's times that it would be good or bad, but there's lots of things that people can invest in that have buffers on it. So it can only go up this much, it can only go down that much. Those kind of things.
So there are safe investments.
There's safe investments, and there's good financial advisors. I've been doing this long enough. I've got lots of financial advisors I work with that do really good jobs in helping people do that, and I can refer people to good people that can help them do it. But also, I think it's a good idea in the estate planning documents themselves to put in the safeguards of they have to hire people that know what they're doing.
So one of the things that I've been fascinated watching Laurel Langmeyer, she doesn't do as much of it anymore, but she's thinking about bringing it back. Right now they're focused on the Wealth Academy, which is very much like what you're talking about. It's financial literacy for any types of investments, whether it's real estate or minerals or inventions and technologies or whatever else. But when I first met her, she did a class called 30 Days to Fast Cash. And there's a book that she has. It's just a list of 120 different things. that are ways you can make money that you didn't know you could make money, but you can do it without learning anything. And you're like, well, that's the dumbest name for a book I've ever seen. But you open it and you start reading it, you're like, dog walking. You're like, who wants to be a dog walker? And then when you start digging into the stories, you realize there are people who make $40,000 or $50,000 a year walking somebody else's dog. You're like, wait a minute, I've been working 40 hours a week down here at XYZ, and I don't make anywhere near that. And I don't have my own business, and I can't write off anything as a business expense, and I don't have an S corp. And why? Why am I a W-2 employee working twice as hard for somebody else to get rich when I could be walking dogs and making more money? That doesn't make any sense. But that's the level of awareness that they've operated in, because they've been, again, the system's not broken. It was designed that way. Sit in the chair, stay in the road, graduate from high school, go to college, get your degree, retire, buy your house, sell your house. There you are. Hope you got a will enough to protect whatever you got left. I think part of that, and this fascinates me because I grew up on potato soup and food stamps. Grew up being so broke I had a job at 13, and I supported, contributed to a large part of the finances of the house all the way up until I graduated from high school. I heard all my life, the rich get richer, the poor go broke, and it's the rich's fault. So even when I worked in a job where six figures wasn't out of reach, there were several people in the six-figure range in the next desk, and I was as good as any of them at my job, but I couldn't see myself being rich. So my own internal belief system, my own argument, wouldn't allow me to succeed. So if you were to ask me then, or you're to ask me now, what's your retirement look like? How much money do you have? I'm an intelligent guy. I know now more than I've ever known in my life, but I still haven't made that transition to thinking like, what will put my grandkids through college? And so looking at everything that I've accomplished, accumulated, et cetera, and going, okay, here's where the assets are hidden in that. I'm afraid that the financial illiteracy that I grew up with, a lot of that is transferred to my kids and even to my grandkids, and I'm looking at it going, okay, how do I undo that now? So I love the fact that your organization is focused on, let's at the minimum, let's cover the basics. What do you have that needs to be protected? What do you have that could grow? How do we help people understand that? I think it was the trust manual that you were talking about when you talked about the rule of 72, and you talked about how you can manage that money, and the person that you're going to hand it over to has to be responsible for that. And they have legal obligations to be financially responsible with that, not just, here you go, good luck with that, hope it works. But there are other things about that. And then I think in the Secure Act is when you said, if you cash it out now, it's got that value. If you can figure out how to live off a portion of that, that portion you're living off of will grow along with what you're saving. In just a matter of a minute or two, and you can talk right into that camera to say it, if you were to cross someone's path who's thinking, I got no major assets, I've been married for 20 years, I don't expect a divorce, I got 2 kids, they get along really well, what do I need a will for? How would you answer that scenario?
So one of the hard things is trying to figure out what you're actually going to leave behind. Because a lot of times, even though you don't feel like you have a lot in assets, if something were to happen to you, the value of your house, the value of your retirement accounts, the value of your life insurance, that's what people are going to inherit. So it may actually be a larger sum than you're thinking. The other hard thing is if you die without a will, the court has to determine who your family is. And they can't just take your kids and your spouse's word for it. They've actually got to have somebody as an investigator go try to find illegitimate children. And so it can cost lots of money for the family, lots of heartache to not have it in place. And so it's extremely important that at the very minimum you have a good will written by an attorney in place to make things easier for your family if something happens.
Very good. Anything I didn't ask that you want to mention?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I thank you for your time today, Leigh. I appreciate you being here. We would shake hands, but coronavirus. So thanks again for your time. Thanks for allowing me to spend so much time with your entire team. It's going to make a great series of interviews and hopefully draw some great awareness to your cause and to your organization and how you serve people.
Yeah, thank you for letting us do this.
And thank you for watching the Leading Leaders podcast, especially the 2020 Servant Leader Series. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I will encourage you to go down in the description. You'll see a link for leaghilton.net. Click on that link. That's LEIGHHILTON.net. You can click on that link, schedule an appointment to sit down with Tammy. If you have a special needs kid and you've got questions and you're thinking, I don't even know what I don't know, schedule some time to chat with Tammy. She'll set you up with Cassidy and make sure that you have all your questions answered. If you feel like, I think I'm trying to figure out how to go to court with this, I've already lost a loved one and I'm stuck. Caitlin is a genius when it comes to probate. She's been there several times herself. If you haven't done that will yet and you have time, do it now. Because you don't know when tomorrow is not tomorrow. And if you're trying to put together a business with a friend, with a group, or you have an idea for a business and you're thinking, I just want to make sure that whatever I invest, whether it's equity or assets, that I get back what I put in, that I have a return on my investment, and I don't lose my shirt doing it, or cost my family everything, then you need to sit down and schedule some time to talk to Hunter. And if you just want to have coffee and have a great conversation about your family and talk about her family, Leigh would love to have coffee with you as well. You probably still have to go through Tammy to set that up, but I encourage you to go to leihilton.net, make an appointment, and get your act together before you have another day to do that. I'm Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.